The clock on the wall read 8 p.m., but the shift had started 14 hours ago. Emily pulled the IV line tight, adjusted the flow rate, and checked the monitor one last time. The smell of antiseptic was a permanent weight in her lungs. She had stayed through the night team's absence, covering the floor alone, moving from room to room until her legs felt like lead. When she finally pushed through the sliding glass doors into the parking lot, the night air hit her with a sudden sharp clarity. She sat in her car and opened her banking app. The balance sat there, a static, fragile number that hadn't moved in weeks despite the endless hours logged. She drove home in silence, the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt matching the pulse in her temples. The apartment was dark when she entered. She dropped her keys, sank into the kitchen chair, and stared at the wall. Her back ached with every breath. She had traded her time for survival, and the cycle was closing in. There was no room left to breathe, no space to look ahead, only the next shift and the same empty total on the screen. The blue light of the laptop screen was the only illumination in the kitchen. Emily pulled up her monthly bank statement. She closed the tab and reached for the book resting on the table. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning lines she had seen before but never truly read. Then, a single sentence caught her. "Successful people think differently about time." She stopped. She looked at the statement again, but this time, the numbers did not look like a failure. They looked like a choice. The exhaustion in her shoulders remained, but the weight in her chest shifted. She had always viewed her paycheck as a final destination, a way to settle debts and buy immediate comfort. Now, she traced the words on the page. Time was not something to be spent to survive, but a resource to be invested to build. The idea was sharp and sudden. She looked around the small apartment, seeing not a cage, but a starting point. The cycle was not broken yet, but for the first time in years, the gears had jammed. She stared at the screen, her mind racing, calculating the possibilities that lay beyond the next paycheck. The cursor blinked on the white screen, a steady, rhythmic pulse. Emily navigated to the brokerage site, her fingers hovering over the keys. She filled in the personal details, each keystroke feeling like a bridge being burned. She entered her bank credentials, the connection between her paycheck and the market now open. She selected the account, typed in $100, and paused. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was not money for rent or electricity. It was a fragment of her life, stripped from her labor, now poised to be sent into the unknown. She stared at the total. $100. If she lost it, the next week would be harder. If she kept it, the status quo remained absolute. She pressed the transfer button. The funds moved. She searched for a company, her eyes scanning the ticker symbols until she found one that paid dividends. She clicked the buy button for a single share. The transaction processed with a soft chime. A confirmation window popped up on the screen. She leaned back, the chair groaning under her weight. The money was gone, but for the first time, it was not spent. It was placed. She had planted her first seed in the soil of the market, and the long wait had begun. Days bled into weeks at the hospital. The work remained the same, the shifts were long, and the exhaustion settled deep into her bones. Every morning, she checked her phone, half expecting a miracle. One morning, the notification finally pinged. She tapped the screen. A single digital entry appeared. 12 cents. It was so small she almost laughed. It could not buy a coffee, a newspaper, or even a bus ticket. It was a fraction of a cent compared to the hours of labor she traded for her daily wage. But then, she looked closer. She had not worked for these 12 cents. She had not scrubbed a floor, changed a dressing, or comforted a patient to earn them. These cents had arrived on their own. She tapped the reinvest button with a steady finger. The 12 cents vanished back into the account, adding to the principal. That tiny, digital movement triggered a shift in her perspective. It was not just money. It was the first tangible proof that she had created a machine that functioned independently of her pulse. She walked into the hospital ward, the weight of the day ahead feeling different. She was no longer just a worker. She was a participant in a new, silent system. The power was small, but it was hers. The cycles of the hospital remained relentless, but the rhythm of her life outside those walls began to diverge. In the break room, the conversation shifted to new car models and luxury vacations. Her colleagues drove into the parking lot with gleaming metal, their status defined by what they possessed. Emily watched from her worn vehicle, her own bank balance staying stubbornly low, held back by her choice to funnel every spare dollar into the market. It was a silent, grinding pressure. She walked past the dealership windows, the urge to participate in the visible world pulling at her resolve. One afternoon, a fellow nurse gestured toward a sleek new sedan. "You work as hard as anyone, Emily. Why not treat yourself?" The question hung in the air, a test of her resolve. Emily looked at the vehicle, then back at her own modest apartment key in her pocket. She felt the gap between who she was and who she was building. She chose the quiet path again. She skipped the upgrade, took the bus when the old car sputtered, and routed the money into the brokerage account. The progress was entirely invisible to the world. No one saw the shares accumulate. No one saw the compounding interest. She lived in the shadow of her own delayed gratification, waiting for the invisible to become inevitable. 5 years of identical shifts. 5 years of watching the same fluorescent lights flicker above the nursing station. The calendar turned, but her daily reality felt frozen. Then, the notification arrived. She pulled her phone from her pocket, shielded the screen from the hospital glare, and checked the account. The monthly dividend had finally crossed the threshold. $100. It was a milestone, yet it felt hollow. $100 would not pay her rent. It would not buy her freedom. It was a drop in a vast, empty ocean. She stood in the sterile hallway, the hum of the ventilation system pressing against her ears. The temptation to withdraw, to spend it on something immediate and sensory, surged through her. She felt the urge to prove her progress to herself, to buy something that shouted success. Instead, she stared at the number until the anxiety subsided. She ignored the market fluctuations that flickered red and green on the screen. She did not care about the daily volatility. She only cared about the trajectory. She tapped the reinvest button, watched the $100 vanish back into the machine, and walked back into the ward. The progress was still agonizingly slow, but she refused to blink. She was betting on a finish line she could not yet see. 10 years of service had etched a new reality into the spreadsheets. Emily sat in the quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, the hum of the machines around her now sounding like background noise to a different life. She opened the latest annual report on her screen. The numbers did not just rise, they surged. The linear crawl of the early years had vanished, replaced by a curve that climbed toward the ceiling. Every reinvested cent had spent a decade gathering weight, and now, the momentum was undeniable. She traced the lines on the graph with her finger. Where once she had tracked pennies, she now stared at figures that defied her previous logic. The snowball had finally reached the bottom of the slope. It was no longer a collection of small parts. It was a singular, massive force of nature that moved on its own. She looked up from the screen, watching the hospital staff rush by, their lives tied to the clock. She realized then that the machinery of her own making had surpassed her. The compounding effect had taken the reins, leaving her as a passenger to her own success. The growth was no longer a struggle. It was an inevitability. Emily pulled a pen from her pocket and wrote 2 numbers on the back of a napkin. The first was her annual nursing salary, the total sum of her labor for the past 12 months. The second was the annual dividend payout from her portfolio. She stared at the paper. She checked the report again, confirming the digits, then performed the math a second time. The numbers did not move. The dividend figure was higher. She looked at the cafeteria ceiling, then back at the napkin, her breathing shallow and rhythmic. The connection between her time and her income had snapped. She was no longer trading hours for a paycheck. The machine she had spent a decade building was now paying her more than the hospital. A sudden, sharp clarity tightened in her chest, followed by a rush of cold air as the burden of the shift she was scheduled to work evaporated. She set the pen down, her hands were steady. The wall of debt and obligation that had defined her existence for 20 years had dissolved in the space of a single calculation. She was not just solvent, she was finished. Emily pushed her chair back, the metal legs scraping against the tile floor. She folded the napkin and placed it in her pocket. She did not look back at the cafeteria or the staff members rushing past. She walked toward the administrative wing, her pace steady and measured. A nurse hurried toward her, gesturing toward a patient room, but Emily simply offered a small, firm nod and continued walking. The hallway felt narrower than she remembered, the air thick with the hum of monitors and the sharp tang of antiseptic. She reached the supervisor's door. She did not hesitate. She knocked once, entered, and placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. The supervisor looked up, brows furrowed, but Emily had already turned toward the exit. She pushed through the heavy double doors of the main entrance, the glass swinging wide. The transition was abrupt. The clinical hum of the hospital vanished, replaced by the rush of wind and the stark intensity of the afternoon sun. She stepped onto the pavement, the bright light washing over her, and did not look back at the building behind her. Emily stopped in the middle of the asphalt lot. She listened to the distant sound of an ambulance siren, a noise that had been the backdrop of her life for 2 decades. It faded into the wind. She looked at the hospital structure, the rows of windows reflecting the harsh afternoon glare, and felt the immense weight of the past 20 years slide away. It did not drop with a crash. It simply ceased to exist as a burden. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her keys, and held them tight. The metal was cool against her palm. She took a long, deep breath, pulling the unfiltered air into her lungs, noting the scent of dry pavement and distant pine. There were no shifts left to cover, no patient charts to update, no bank balances to obsess over in the dark. For the first time, she looked at the horizon without calculating the cost of the next hour. She turned away from the building, opened the door to her car, and sat in the driver's seat. She did not start the engine immediately. She just sat, watching the light change, knowing that every minute from this point forward belonged to no one but her.